In our small town of Olite, everyone knows each other, or thinks they do. I thought I knew my children. How wrong I was. My name is Elvis Knox, and I am 68 years old. An unusual name for a woman, isn't it? My parents were rock and roll fans and named me after Elvis Presley a few weeks before his death. Bad luck, my relatives said. Maybe they were right. I worked as an accountant at Ole Construction for 42 years. 42 years of columns of numbers, quarterly reports, and tax returns. I wouldn't say it was my dream job, but it allowed me to raise 3 children after my husband Silas died suddenly of a heart attack. He was only 37, and our youngest, Toby, was just 3 years old. The house I live in was bought by Silas and me a year before his death. It's small, 2 stories, with a worn roof and creaky floorboards, but it's ours. I paid off the mortgage in 15 years, saving on everything from clothes to food. But the children always had everything they needed. Bridget, my middle child, loved music, and I paid for her piano lessons. My eldest, Lloyd, played basketball, and for that, he needed good shoes. And Toby? Well, Toby was always a special child who needed special attention. The empty house seems too big now that I'm alone. The photos on the walls remind me of the days when children's laughter filled the house. On the bookshelves are worn textbooks and school awards. I've kept everything, from Bridget's first drawing to Lloyd's sports trophies. I even kept the notes from Toby's teachers complaining about his behavior. Over the last 10 years, our relationship has slowly but surely deteriorated. I can't say exactly when everything changed. Perhaps it was when the children started their own families and had their own problems, or when I started to get older and demand more attention. Or maybe they were always like this, and I just didn't want to notice. Lloyd is now 45 and works as a real estate agent. He has a wife, Audra, and 2 teenage children, Ned and Paige. Bridget is 42, an administrator at a dental clinic, divorced, and raising her daughter Iris. Toby is 38 and still finding himself, getting by with odd jobs, and living mainly off his girlfriend Tamsin. Visits became less frequent, phone calls shorter. Busy at work. Kids are sick. Another time, Mom. But when they need something, money for a new car, help with the mortgage, or childcare, they're right there. Last year, I retired. My arthritis had progressed, and sitting at a computer for 8 hours a day had become unbearable. I thought it would give me more time for myself, maybe for a hobby. But instead, I started getting sick more often. Nothing serious. High blood pressure, joint problems, the usual ailments of old age. But for my children, it was a cause for concern. Or rather, concern about my house and money. The first call was from Lloyd. Mom, Bridget, Toby, and I were talking. It's hard for you to live alone in such a big house. Maybe you should think about something smaller? I laughed it off then. Then Bridget came to visit. Mom, I found a wonderful retirement home. It has such a nice atmosphere. You won't be lonely there. I said I'd think about it. Even Toby called, for the first time in 3 months, to say he was worried about me. And yesterday, they all got together. A family council, as they called it. Lloyd came with his Audra, Bridget came alone, and Toby brought Tamsin, even though they're not married, and I've only seen this girl a couple of times. Mom, we're all very worried about you, Lloyd began, sitting at my kitchen table and avoiding my gaze. There's nothing to worry about, I replied, setting out the teacups. I'm perfectly fine. Mrs. Knox, Audra interjected in her sickly sweet voice, you understand that at your age, living alone in a 2-story house, it's not safe. I looked at my daughter-in-law. Audra had always been polite to me, but behind that politeness lay impatience. She clearly considered me a burden on their family. I'm doing just fine, Audra. Thank you for your concern, I replied dryly. Mom, Bridget put her hand on mine. We're saying this because we love you. You need care. You need to socialize with people your age. My age? I pulled my hand away. I'm 68, not 98. I don't need round-the-clock care. Toby had been silent the whole time, buried in his phone. It was typical of him to avoid conflict, especially when it came to making important decisions. Listen, Mom, Lloyd got to the point. We've found a great option. Sunny Valley isn't your typical nursing home. It's a community for active retirees. It has a swimming pool, a library, interest groups, and it probably costs a fortune? I interrupted. Well, it's an investment in your health and well-being, Lloyd replied evasively, which you're suggesting we pay for by selling my house. I put my cup down on the table with a little more force than I intended. An awkward silence ensued. They exchanged glances, as if deciding who would continue this unpleasant conversation. Mom, Bridget finally said, the house is too big for you alone. Maintaining it is a constant expense. If you sell it, you'll have enough money to live comfortably in Sunny Valley, with money to spare. What for? I asked bluntly. For your needs? For Lloyd's new car? For private school for the children? To pay off Toby's debts? That's not fair. Lloyd raised his voice. We're thinking of your best interests. If you were thinking of my best interests, I replied, trying to remain calm, you would ask what I want, and I want to stay in my house. But you can't do everything yourself, Tamsin interjected, who had been silent until then. Cleaning, cooking, even climbing the stairs is a problem for you now. I looked at her in surprise. This girl had only seen me a few times and already decided she could judge my abilities. I'm afraid we insist, Mom, Lloyd said firmly. This decision is in your best interest. Decided? By whom? I looked at their faces. The whole family, Bridget replied. We've even looked at a few options for selling the house. Lloyd says the market is very favorable for sellers right now. Oh, I see. Lloyd is already thinking about his commission from the sale. He is a real estate agent after all. What will happen to my things? The furniture your father and I bought? The photographs, books, mementos? Mom, you'll have your own apartment at Sunny Valley, but of course it's smaller than the house, Bridget said, as if explaining something to a child. We'll help you choose the essentials, and the rest. Well, some things can be sold, some things can be given away. Or thrown away? I finished for her. Don't be dramatic, Mom, Toby sighed, finally looking up from his phone. No one's going to throw anything away. It's just, well, we'll have to sort through things, yes. So I understand you don't need my books or the china set I inherited from my grandmother. What about your father's record collection? Mom, Lloyd rubbed his nose. Let's not get into the details right now. The main decision is to sell the house and move to Sunny Valley. We can discuss everything else later. I leaned back in my chair and looked at my children. When did they become so callous? When did they stop seeing me as a person with my own desires and rights? When did I become a burden to them, one that needed to be gotten rid of under the pretext of caring? What if I refuse? I asked quietly. They exchanged glances again. There was something conspiratorial in those glances, something they were discussing behind my back. Mom, Bridget took my hand again. We're worried about your health. If you refuse help, we may have to consult doctors. You may need a professional assessment of your decision-making abilities. There it was, the threat to have me declared incompetent if I didn't agree to their plan. My own daughter, whom I once changed diapers for and sang lullabies to, was now threatening to take away my right to control my own life. I felt something shift inside me. Anger and resentment gave way to cold determination. They wanted to get rid of me? Fine, but on my terms, not theirs. I see you've already made up your minds, I said calmly. When are you planning to move? They were surprised by my sudden compliance. Lloyd was even a little taken aback. Well, we were thinking maybe in a month. We need to get the house ready to sell, do some minor repairs to increase the price. In a month, I repeated. Okay, I'll start packing. Really? Bridget couldn't hide her surprise. You agree? Do I have a choice? I smiled, but the smile didn't reach my eyes. You made it clear that this is not up for discussion. Mom, we're doing this for you. Toby tried to hug me, but I pulled away. Of course, dear, I replied. For me. They left feeling pleased with themselves. They thought they had won, that they had convinced their stubborn old mother to make a sensible decision. They didn't know that I was preparing a surprise for them that would make them regret today's conversation. In the evening, I sat in my chair for a long time, looking at family photos. Here was Lloyd at his graduation. Here was Bridget at her first piano competition. Here was Toby with a black eye after another fight at school. I loved them so much, and I still love them no matter what. But love doesn't mean you have to let yourself be manipulated. I did everything I could for them. Now it's time to think about myself. I woke up early, as usual. Old habits are hard to break, even when you no longer have to rush to work. I made myself a cup of strong tea and sat by the window, watching the rising sun paint the sky over Olite a soft pink. After yesterday's family council, my thoughts wouldn't leave me alone. How did we get to this point? When had my children turned into these calculating strangers? Memories flooded back, taking me 30 years ago. Silas died in April. I remember that day with frightening clarity. Lloyd was 13, Bridget was 10, and Toby had just turned 3. The call from the hospital, the rush, the white walls of the corridors, and the doctor with his eyes downcast, telling me it was too late. That day, I stood at the hospital window and realized that now everything, the children, the house, the bills, was on my shoulders. We had insurance, but it was only enough to pay off part of the mortgage and cover the funeral expenses. And then began the gray, everyday life of a single mother. My main job as an accountant at a construction company took up 8 hours, 5 days a week. In the evenings, I worked as a remote accountant for 3 small businesses. I often fell asleep at my desk while checking reports, but I needed money for school uniforms, medicine, and repairs to the leaky roof. I remember how I saved on everything. I bought clothes at sales or in secondhand stores, only the most necessary and cheapest items for myself. I cooked large portions so that there would be enough for several days. I learned to repair plumbing and small household appliances from video tutorials from the library. Calling a repairman was an unaffordable luxury. But I tried to give my children everything I could. Bridget wanted to study music, so I found the money for piano lessons. Lloyd dreamed of a career in basketball, so I bought him good sneakers and a uniform. Toby required special attention because of his difficult personality, so I paid for consultations with a child psychologist. During particularly difficult months, when there was only a few cents left in the account and payday was still a week away, I ate oatmeal and cheap pasta so that the children could eat properly. Of course, they didn't know about this. I always said I wasn't hungry or that I had already eaten. My only consolation was Friday evenings. The children often stayed overnight with friends or relatives, and I allowed myself an hour or two with a book and a glass of cheap wine. Sometimes my neighbor Una would come over, and we would chat about trivial things, forgetting the hardships of life for a while. Una was 10 years older than me. Her children were already grown up and had moved away, so she generously shared her advice and support. The years passed, the children grew up, and the expenses only increased. College for Lloyd, then for Bridget. I took on extra accounting jobs, sometimes working 16 hours a day. I tried to save something for the future, but the money slipped through my fingers like water. When Lloyd graduated from college and found his first job at a real estate company, I thought things would get easier, but almost immediately, he decided to marry Audrey. They wanted a big wedding, and of course, I helped financially. Then they needed money for a down payment on a house, so I withdrew some of my modest savings. After college, Bridget decided to continue her education and get a master's degree. That meant 2 more years of tuition. Then she married Alan, but the marriage didn't last long. After the divorce, she needed money to rent an apartment for herself and little Iris. I came to the rescue again. Toby, he was always the most difficult. He changed colleges like gloves, couldn't decide on a profession, and was constantly getting into debt. I paid his bills, got him out of trouble, gave him money for promising projects that never brought in any income. All this time, I put off thinking about my own future, my life, my interests, my dreams. All of this seemed insignificant compared to the needs of my children. Then, about 12 years ago, something happened that changed my life. I became friends with a new client for whom I did the bookkeeping. Orrin Payne was a successful real estate investor from the neighboring town of Radcliffe. One day, while reviewing his reports, I noticed how profitable this business could be with the right approach. Orrin, I asked him during one of our meetings, do you think someone with limited capital could get into this business? He looked at me with interest. Are you referring to yourself, Elvis? I nodded, a little embarrassed. I was 56, an age when most people no longer start new financial ventures. Do you have any savings? He asked. A little, I replied. 10,000 for a rainy day. Orrin thought for a moment. You know, there's an apartment building in Redcliffe that's being sold at a bargain price. The owner is getting divorced and wants to get rid of the joint property quickly. This money won't be enough to pay for the entire purchase, but it's enough for a down payment. That's how my secret business began. I didn't tell my children. I was afraid they would ask for money for their own needs, and it would be difficult for me to refuse. Orrin helped me with the mortgage and recommended a management company. I started to receive a small but stable income from rent. 3 years later, having paid off most of the loan, I was able to take out another loan and buy a second house, smaller but in a better neighborhood. And 4 years ago, already preparing for retirement, I bought a third one. All these years, I led a double financial life. To my children, I was still the same mother living on a modest accountant's salary and then an even more modest pension. They didn't know that once a month I went to Radcliffe to meet with the manager, that a decent amount of money was accumulating in my secret bank account. I was often tormented by my conscience because of this double life, especially when the children complained of financial difficulties and I could have helped but didn't, knowing from experience that my money would go toward their whims rather than their real needs. Last year, when the arthritis in my fingers became too painful for long hours at the computer, I finally retired. By this time, all 3 houses in Radcliffe were fully paid off and were generating a good income. I even prepared a small apartment in one of them for myself, just in case. My intuition told me that this might happen sooner than I thought. My health really did start to fail. Not only did I have arthritis, but my blood pressure was fluctuating and my heart was sometimes playing up. I became forgetful. Little things slipped my mind. Nothing serious, just normal age-related changes. But the children noticed it and began to worry. At first, their concern seemed sincere. Lloyd stopped by once a month to check if everything was okay with the house. Bridget sometimes brought ready-made meals or medicine. Even Toby called more often than usual. But then I began to notice changes. Every time Lloyd visited, he hinted that the house was too big for me alone and that many people my age preferred to live in special retirement communities. Bridget began bringing brochures about nursing homes, praising their amenities. Toby asked me directly if I would consider selling the house and enjoying life without worrying about its maintenance. Their insistence intensified after I fell in the kitchen and badly bruised my hip. It was nothing serious, just a bruise, but the children blew it up into a tragedy. What if you had broken your hip? What if you had lost consciousness and no one had known? I understood what they were getting at. The house in Oleta wasn't just a place to live, it was an asset. By conservative estimates, it was worth about 300,000. That's a lot of money. And if I sold it and then moved into a nursing home, well, there would be enough money left over to pass on to my children. It hurt to realize that their concern was simply a calculation. They didn't call just to ask how I was feeling. They didn't stop by just to sit and chat. They were only interested in my property. When Ned and Paige, Lloyd's children, were younger, they often stayed with me on weekends. I baked cookies for them, told them stories, and helped them with their homework. Now they are teenagers, and I only see them at family gatherings, where they are glued to their phones. Iris, Bridget's daughter, still calls me sometimes, but even that is becoming less frequent. I often think about what I did wrong. Maybe I spoiled them too much. Maybe I didn't teach them to value money and hard work. Or is it not me, but this time when people have become more selfish, more focused on their own needs? In the last year before retirement, I began to prepare for possible changes. I transferred most of my money to accounts in Radcliffe. I updated my will, but didn't tell my children about its contents. I gradually moved my most valuable possessions, photo albums, jewelry, documents, to a specially rented storage facility. I didn't know when exactly my children would take decisive action, but I was sure it would happen. And yesterday, they finally revealed their cards. Family Council. What irony! As if they really consider us a family, and not just people connected by blood and property. The tea in my cup had long since cooled. I got up to pour a fresh cup and grimaced from the pain in my knee. Yes, I'm getting old. Yes, it's getting harder for me to manage the house. But it's my house, damn it. The house I fought for, that I kept for my children, thinking it would remain in the family, would be a refuge for future generations. How naive of me. They see nothing in this house but money. For them, it's not the place where they grew up, where they hid under the table during thunderstorms, where they celebrated birthdays and Christmas. It's just an asset to be converted into cash. I looked at the calendar on the wall. 1 month. They gave me 1 month to prepare for the sale of the house and the move to Sunny Valley. Well, I have plans for this month too, and I think the result will surprise them very much. 4 weeks before the scheduled move, my children began to appear at the house more often than usual. Lloyd came by every weekend, supposedly to help sort things out, but in reality to supervise the process and assess what could be sold profitably. Bridget brought boxes and bags for packing, and then, without asking, decided what was worth keeping and what should have been thrown away long ago. Toby showed up less often, but each visit was accompanied by requests to give him this or that item, as a memento, or because you won't need it anymore, Mom. I didn't argue. On the contrary, I showed an unusual degree of compliance. Yes, dear, of course you can take that floor lamp. No, dear, I don't need all these books in a nursing home. Of course, these old records will take up too much space. My calmness confused them. Lloyd even asked if I was okay. I had never parted with things so easily before. I replied that I had simply decided to accept the inevitable and not complicate life for myself or them. But behind this mask of humility, I was methodically carrying out my plan. Every morning, when the children were at work, I would select the things that were truly valuable to me and quietly take them away, ostensibly to charity, but in reality to a rented storage unit or to my apartment in Radcliffe. Photo albums, favorite books, jewelry, Silas's mementos, everything that had emotional value and that I didn't want to entrust to the children. In the evenings, I met with Orrin in a small cafe on the outskirts of Olyte. We finalized details, checked documents, and discussed legal nuances. Orrin became more than just a business partner. Over the years, we had grown close, and I trusted him like no one else. 2 weeks before the move, Lloyd brought in a realtor, a colleague from his agency, to appraise the house and take photos for the listing. They walked through the rooms, discussing potential improvements that could increase the price. "The bathroom will have to be completely renovated, of course," said Lloyd's colleague, ignoring me as if I were no longer in the house. "The kitchen is also outdated, but it could be fixed up with some cosmetic repairs. The roof definitely needs to be replaced, though." "We can include that in the price," Lloyd replied. "The house is in a good neighborhood, and the lot is decent. I think we can ask for even more than the market price." They talked about my house as if it were a commodity, an auction lot, not as a place where 3 generations had grown up, but in terms of square footage and potential profit. "When do you plan to put it up for sale?" asked his colleague. "Right after Mom moves out," Lloyd replied. "We've already reserved a place for her at Sunny Valley. We're putting down the initial payment from our savings, and when the house sells, we'll recoup the costs." I sat in a chair in the corner of the living room, pretending to be engrossed in a book, but inside I was seething. "Our savings," he said, as if they had been saving money for me for years, and not me helping them financially my whole life. A week before the move, I visited my lawyer, not the local one my children knew, but a lawyer from Radcliffe recommended by Orrin. We finalized the changes to the will and prepared all the necessary documents for my surprise. The lawyer, an elderly gentleman with piercing eyes, asked me, "Are you sure you want to completely disinherit your children, Mrs. Knox? This is a serious step." I nodded. "Absolutely sure. I gave them everything I could while I was alive. Now I want to dispose of the remaining property as I see fit. They can contest the will," he warned, "especially if they claim that you were incompetent at the time it was drafted." "That's why I'm here," I smiled, "so you can attest to my sound mind." He nodded understandingly and signed the documents. 3 days before the move, my children threw a farewell party at my house. Everyone came: Lloyd with Audra and the kids, Bridget with Iris, Toby with Tamsin, even a few neighbors and old family friends. They set up a table in the living room and brought a cake with the words, "Good luck in your new life, Mom." The toasts were full of false optimism. To a new beginning, to a well-deserved rest, to a carefree life in Sunny Valley. No one said the truth, to finally getting rid of the burden and getting our money. After the toasts, conversations about the future began, mine and the house's. I sat in my chair and watched as my children, already a little tipsy from the champagne, hid their true intentions less and less. "You know, Lloyd," Audra said, "when the house sells, we could finally build that addition we've been dreaming about for so long. The kids need more space. They're growing up." "Yes, I've already thought about it," Lloyd nodded. "If everything goes as planned, we'll have enough for the extension and a new car." Bridget joined the conversation. "And I'm thinking of sending Iris to art camp this summer. She's so good at drawing. She needs to develop her talent." "Art camp?" Toby snorted. "Seriously? What about my debts? By the way, I almost lost my apartment last month because of late payments." "Your debts are your problem," Bridget snapped. "If you finally found a decent job—" "Enough," Lloyd interrupted. "Let's not argue. There's enough money for everyone. The house is worth a decent amount, especially after the renovations I'm planning." "And how much do you think we'll get?" Tamsin asked, showing interest in the conversation for the first time. "According to my estimates, no less than 350,000, Lloyd replied proudly. "After deducting the costs of Sunny Valley and so on, we'll have about 280 to 300,000 left." How will we divide it? Toby asked. Equally? Well, I would say it would be fair to take my contribution into account, Lloyd began. After all, I'm the one doing the selling, spending my time. They continued to discuss the division of the money, completely forgetting my presence. Or maybe they already considered me so old and frail that I wouldn't understand the essence of the conversation. I sat quietly, smiling to myself. If only they knew what surprise awaited them in a few days. However, they would soon find out. The day of the move arrived. Lloyd's minivan was parked outside the house in the morning, ready to take me and my belongings to Sunny Valley. The children all came together. Apparently, they wanted to make sure I was really leaving. Have you packed everything, Mom? Bridget asked, looking at the several suitcases and boxes in the hallway. Yes, dear, I replied. Everything I need. What about the rest of your things? Lloyd asked. Furniture, dishes, appliances? As we discussed, I shrugged. Some things you'll take with you, some we'll sell with the house, and some we'll donate to charity. Great. Lloyd nodded. I've already arranged for a couple of buyers to come and look at the house. They'll be here the day after tomorrow, so we'll have time to tidy up a bit. I walked around the house one last time. The room seemed unusually empty, without many of the things I had secretly taken away over the past few weeks. But to the children, the house still looked lived in. They didn't notice the absence of things that had no value to them. In the bedroom, I lingered by the dresser where I kept my documents. Among them was a large yellow envelope that I had prepared especially for this day. I took it and went down to the kitchen, where the children were waiting for me. Well, are you ready? Toby asked, glancing nervously at his watch. I have a meeting in 2 hours, so we should hurry. Almost, I replied. I still have something else to do. I put the envelope on the kitchen table and looked at my children. What's that? Asked Bridget. Some documents for the house? Sort of, I smiled. I want you to open this envelope after I leave. Consider it my farewell gift. Mom, if these are old papers or bills, we could look through them together, Lloyd began, to make sure everything is in order. No, dear, I shook my head. I prefer that you do it without me, and please wait until I'm gone. It's important. They exchanged glances, clearly puzzled by my insistence, but didn't argue. I knew their curiosity would get the better of them as soon as the door closed behind me. All right, Lloyd finally agreed. As you say, Mom. I glanced once more around the kitchen, where I had cooked for my family for so many years, the living room where we had celebrated birthdays and Christmas, the staircase my children had run down in the mornings on their way to school. Well, I guess it's time to say goodbye, I said, trying to make my voice sound a little sad and uncertain, just as they expected. Everything will be fine, Mom. Bridget hugged me. You'll like Sunny Valley. There are lots of people your age there, and there's always something to do. And we'll visit you, Toby added, though we both knew that was a lie. Lloyd started carrying my suitcases to the car, and I glanced once more at the envelope on the table. My revenge, my little thank you for years of neglect and selfishness. When everything was loaded, I got in the car next to Lloyd. Bridget and Toby stayed in the house, no doubt eagerly waiting for me to leave so they could open the envelope. Ready? Lloyd asked. More than, I replied and smiled, sincerely this time. We hardly spoke on the way to Sunny Valley. Lloyd was lost in his thoughts, probably already planning the renovation and sale of the house. I looked out the window at the streets of Olyte, the town where I had lived most of my life, passing by. You know, I finally said, I think you can drop me off at the bus station. Lloyd looked at me in surprise. What? Why? We're going to Sunny Valley. My plans have changed, I replied calmly. I'm not going to Sunny Valley. But we discussed everything. We decided everything. Lloyd began to get annoyed. We already made the down payment. I know, I nodded, and I'm sorry you lost that money. Although, no, actually, I'm not sorry. Lloyd pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned to me. Mom, what's going on? Where are you going? Somewhere where I'm truly appreciated, I replied. And I think right now, Bridget and Toby are opening my farewell gift. I'm sure they'll call you soon. Now, please drop me off at the bus station, or I'll get out right here. Lloyd looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. Perhaps he was. For the first time in many years, he saw not just an old mother, but a woman with her own plans and will. What's in that envelope? He finally asked. I smiled. A little truth, something you should have known a long time ago. At that moment, Lloyd's phone started ringing. Bridget's name appeared on the screen. I knew they had already opened the envelope and discovered its contents. Title deeds to 3 apartment buildings in Radcliffe, bank statements with 6-figure sums, and, most importantly, a notarized notice that I had changed my will, disinheriting all 3 children in favor of my longtime friend Una. Lloyd kept looking at me and then at the ringing phone, not knowing how to react. You'd better answer it, I advised. I think Bridget really wants to talk to you. He answered the call, and even without putting the phone to his ear, I could hear Bridget's excited, almost hysterical voice. The bus station, Lloyd, I reminded him. I have to catch the bus. He mechanically started the car and drove toward the station, still talking to his sister on the phone, casting suspicious glances at me. I leaned back in my seat and felt completely at peace for the first time in a long time. My new life was beginning today, and it was beginning with the truth. The bus to Redcliffe took just over an hour. I sat by the window, watching the landscape change from the suburban houses of Olyte to the industrial outskirts, and finally to the neat streets of Redcliffe. My phone rang constantly the whole way. I saw the names of the children flashing across the screen. Lloyd, Bridget, Toby, Lloyd again. I didn't answer. Let them get nervous. Let them feel just a drop of the uncertainty they tried to instill in me. Redcliffe greeted me with a sunny early autumn day. The leaves were just beginning to turn yellow, but the air already had that special clarity that only September brings. I took a deep breath and smiled. It was the air of freedom. I took a taxi from the bus station. The driver, a young man with a friendly smile, helped me with my suitcases. Where to, ma'am? Maple Street, number 15, I replied. He whistled. Nice neighborhood. Do you have relatives there? No, I smiled. It's my house. The first of the 3 apartment buildings I had purchased in Redcliffe was the oldest and my favorite. It was a 3-story brick building from the 1930s with wide windows and spacious apartments. Not the most luxurious, but cozy and full of character. Just what I was looking for. The apartment I had prepared for my move was on the 2nd floor. It was a 2-room apartment with high ceilings and wooden floors, with windows overlooking a quiet courtyard with maple trees. I specifically chose an apartment that didn't require climbing too steep a staircase. After all, age is taking its toll. The manager, Mr. Graves, was waiting for me at the entrance. Over the years of working together, we had become almost friends, even though he didn't know all the details of my life in Olyte. Mrs. Knox, I'm glad to finally see you as a permanent resident. He shook my hand. Everything is ready, as you requested. The furniture has been delivered, and the refrigerator is stocked. Thank you, Frank, I smiled. I don't know what I would have done without your help. It's nothing, he waved his hand. The tenants will be happy to meet the owner. You're not planning on hiding the fact that you own the building, are you? No, I'm not, I replied, but there's no need to shout about it either. Just a new neighbor who bought an apartment. They'll figure it out for themselves in time. Mr. Graves helped me with my suitcases, and I finally crossed the threshold of my new home. The apartment greeted me with sunlight streaming through the tall windows. The furniture I had ordered online, and which Frank had helped me assemble, was simple but comfortable. Nothing fancy, but functional and pleasing to the eye. Some of my paintings, which I had brought with me, were already hanging on the walls, and my favorite books were on the bookshelves. "Is there anything else you need?" Mr. Graves asked, looking around the apartment. "No, thank you." I shook my head. "I think I just need to settle in now." When he left, I slowly walked through the rooms, touching things, opening cabinets, checking to see if everything was in place. It was a strange feeling. Everything around me was both new and familiar. My things, but a new place. I was still Elvis Knox, but it was as if a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders. I opened the refrigerator. Frank had really taken care of everything. Fresh groceries, a bottle of good wine, even my favorite ice cream. Smiling, I took out the wine and a glass. Why not celebrate a new beginning? With a glass of wine, I settled into a chair by the window. My phone kept vibrating. Now the kids had apparently switched to texting. I didn't read their messages. Instead, I watched the maple leaves dancing in the wind and thought about how, for the first time in many years, I was truly free. No obligations to the kids, no guilt, no need to justify my decisions or sacrifice my desires for the sake of others. Just me and my life, the way I want it to be. After lunch, I decided to explore the neighborhood. It was a quiet, mostly residential area with small shops and cafes along the main street. I took a leisurely stroll around the neighborhood, stopping at a bookstore and a flower shop. I bought some fresh bread at a small bakery and a few skeins of yarn and knitting needles at a craft store. Knitting was one of my hobbies that I had given up many years ago. When my children were little, I knitted sweaters and hats for them. But then, when they grew up and began to feel embarrassed about homemade clothes, preferring brand name clothing, I put my needles aside. Now, looking at the soft, deep blue wool yarn, I felt an old passion awakening. In the park near my house, I found a bench under an old oak tree, the perfect place to read. I made a mental note to come here with a book in the mornings, when the park was not yet filled with noisy families with children. Back home, I unpacked the remaining items, put my clothes in the closets, and arranged my cosmetics in the bathroom. These were ordinary, everyday activities, but in the context of my new life, they seemed almost ritualistic. I wasn't just unpacking suitcases, I was creating my new space, my refuge. In the afternoon, there was a knock at the door. It was Mrs. Chang, my neighbor on the left, with a plate of homemade cookies. "Welcome to our building," she smiled. "Frank said we have a new neighbor." I thought a few cookies would never hurt in a new home. "That's very kind of you." I invited her in. "Would you like a cup of tea?" Mrs. Chang turned out to be a retired artist. She had lived in this building for 15 years and knew all the neighbors. "A young couple with a child lives on the third floor," she said, sipping her tea. "They're very nice, although the baby sometimes cries at night. In the apartment across from you lives Mr. Forrest, a professor of literature. He's rarely home, spending all his time at the university library. And next door to me lives Miss Baxter, a nurse. She works the night shift, so she prefers quiet during the day." I listened, memorizing names and details. These were my new neighbors, the people with whom I would share my daily life. Not family, but perhaps a community. "And you?" asked Mrs. Chang. "What did you do before you retired?" "I was an accountant," I replied. "I worked for a construction company for most of my life." "Oh, so you're good with numbers." She nodded. "A useful skill. You know, our building committee is looking for a treasurer. Might that interest you?" I smiled. The last thing I wanted right now was to take on new responsibilities, especially ones related to accounting. But the very idea that I was seen as a useful member of the community rather than a burden warmed my heart. Maybe, I replied evasively. I need to settle in a bit first. After Mrs. Chang left, I decided to finally do what I had dreamed of doing for many years: painting. In my youth, before I had children, I took painting lessons and was even considered a fairly good amateur artist. But then I lacked the time, energy, and most importantly, the peace of mind to be creative. I took a small set of watercolors out of my suitcase, my secret housewarming gift to myself. I spread paper on the table and prepared water and brushes. What to paint? The landscape outside the window? A still life with fruit on the table? I decided to start with something simple: a maple branch with autumn leaves that I could see from the window. The first strokes were uncertain. My hand was unaccustomed to the brush, but gradually my old skills began to return. I mixed colors, applied layer after layer, watching the autumn beauty blossom on the paper. It was not a masterpiece, of course, but for my first attempt in many years, it was quite a decent piece of work. While painting, I didn't notice how time flew by. It was already getting dark outside when I finally put down my brush and stretched. The feeling was amazing, tired, but in a pleasant, creative way. It wasn't the exhaustion I felt after a day at the office, but the feeling of a job well done, of beauty created. I decided not to cook anything complicated for dinner: an omelet with cheese and herbs, a salad of fresh vegetables, a glass of the same wine. I set the table nicely with a napkin and a candle, even though I was alone. Why not treat myself to a little luxury? While eating dinner, I listened to classical music. Silas loved Chopin, and now, so many years after his death, these melodies still reminded me of the happy days of our marriage. But unlike in previous years, now these memories did not cause acute pain, only a quiet, bright sadness. After dinner, I settled down on the sofa with a book, an old Jane Austen novel that I had read several times before. The phone on the coffee table continued to vibrate from time to time. I glanced at the screen: 37 missed calls, 16 messages. The children were clearly panicking. Finally, deciding it was time to put an end to the noise, I picked up the phone and turned it off completely. They wouldn't be able to reach me until tomorrow morning, maybe even longer. Let them suffer in uncertainty, just as I had suffered when they didn't call me for weeks, busy with their own affairs. Towards nightfall, I opened the window, letting in the cool autumn air. From the park came the rustling of leaves, music played somewhere in the distance, and quiet laughter came from the neighboring apartment. The sounds of a new life, a new chapter that I had opened for myself. As I was getting ready for bed, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Gray hair, wrinkles around my eyes and mouth, but my gaze was different. Clear, determined, almost young. I smiled at my reflection. Hello, new Elvis Knox. Lying in bed, I thought about what I had done. Was my action too cruel towards the children? Perhaps. But they deserved this lesson for their callousness and selfishness. And who knows, maybe it will do them good, make them think about their behavior. Did I regret it? Not one bit. I felt a lightness and freedom that I hadn't felt in a very long time. Tomorrow would be a new day, full of new opportunities. I could do whatever I wanted: paint, read, knit, walk around the city. Maybe I'd sign up for some classes or join a club. Everything I had put off for years was now within reach. With these thoughts, I fell asleep in my new apartment, in my new city, in my new life. My phone, turned off and useless, lay on the nightstand. The children were undoubtedly furious and panicked when they discovered the gift I had left them. But that was their problem, not mine. For the first time in many years, I slept peacefully, without worries about tomorrow or guilt about the past. I woke up with the first rays of sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. I lay there for a few seconds in confusion, not understanding where I was until my memory came back in a wave. My move, my new apartment in Radcliffe, my freedom from the children and their manipulations. I smiled, stretched, and slowly got out of bed, enjoying the silence and tranquility of the new day. My morning ritual in my new home took longer than usual. I still didn't remember where my things were, and I enjoyed looking for them, rediscovering my closets and drawers. I made coffee in the new coffee maker, toasted some bread, and sat down to eat breakfast by the window, looking at the maple trees in the yard. Their leaves glowed golden in the morning light, creating the feeling that everything around was bathed in a warm glow. Only after my second cup of coffee did I allow myself to glance at the switched-off phone lying on the table. It was like a sleeping dragon. I knew that if I woke it up, it would spew flames of anger, resentment, and manipulation. But sooner or later, it had to be done. Taking a deep breath, I pressed the power button. The phone vibrated as it booted up, then erupted in a series of beeps, audio notifications of missed calls and messages. I waited for it to calm down and looked at the screen. 134 missed calls, exactly 134, and 62 messages. My God, I started scrolling through the calls. Lloyd had called 48 times, Bridget 36, Toby 23. The rest were from Audra, Tamsin, and even a few from my grandchildren, obviously at their parents' insistence. There was also one call from my lawyer, Edward Woods, and two from Orrin. I decided to read the messages in order, starting with the earliest ones. The first was from Lloyd, sent immediately after I left. "Mom, what the hell is going on? Call me immediately." Then Bridget, "Mom, we found an envelope. Please explain what's going on. Is this some kind of joke?" Toby was more direct. "You own 3 houses, and you didn't tell us?" The following messages became increasingly emotional. Lloyd went from disbelief to anger. "I just called Redcliffe, and these houses are indeed yours. How could you hide this from us for so many years?" And, "Do you realize that we invested our own money in Sunny Valley? Who's going to compensate us for our expenses now?" Bridget appealed to her mother's sense of guilt. "Mom, please call back. We're all very upset. If we've hurt you in any way, let's discuss it like adults." And, "Do you have any idea how you've hurt our feelings after everything we've done for you?" Toby, as usual, thought first and foremost of himself. "Mom, if you have money, maybe you could help me with my rent. I'm about to be evicted." I snorted when I read that message. Typical Toby. As the hours passed without a response from me, the tone of the messages changed. Lloyd resorted to threats. "If you don't contact us soon, I'll go to the police. You're an elderly person, and your strange behavior could be a sign of dementia." And, "I've consulted with a lawyer. We can contest your new will on the grounds of incapacity." Bridget tried to appeal to maternal love. "Iris has been crying all morning. She thinks she'll never see her grandmother again. How can you do this to your own granddaughter?" And Toby suddenly became incredibly caring. "Mom, I'm really worried about you. If you need help, I'm ready to come anywhere. Just tell me where you are." The last messages were sent late at night. Lloyd, "We called all the hospitals in the area. If you're okay and you're just ignoring us, this is the cruelest thing you've ever done." Bridget, "Mom, please just let us know you're alive and well. We're going crazy with worry." And Toby, obviously after much thought, "Listen, if this is because we wanted you to move into a nursing home, we can talk about it. Maybe you can stay in your house and we'll help you with your daily life. Just give us a call." I put down the phone and finished my cold coffee. Their reactions were predictable, even cliched. Lloyd tried to scare me with legal consequences. Bridget played on my pity. Toby tried to curry favor in the hope of financial assistance. None of them really tried to understand why I did what I did. None of them looked at the situation from my point of view. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The screen lit up with the name of Edward Woods, my lawyer. This was a call worth answering. "Good morning, Edward," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and confident. "Mrs. Knox." Relief was evident in his voice. "I'm glad I got through to you. Your children have been literally bombarding my office." "I can imagine," I sighed. "I suppose they're demanding that I be declared incompetent?" "That's right," he confirmed. "Your eldest son is particularly insistent. But don't worry, their legal position is very weak. We took all the necessary precautions when changing the will. Several independent doctors have confirmed your full legal capacity, and all the documents are in order." "So they won't be able to contest the will?" I asked. "They can try," Edward replied, "but the chances of success are minimal. And remember, even if they did manage to contest the will, it would not affect your current assets. The houses and accounts belong to you, and you have the right to dispose of them as you see fit." I felt relieved. It wasn't that I seriously feared that the children would be able to deprive me of my property, but it was nice to hear confirmation from a professional. "Thank you, Edward. Is there anything else I should know?" "Yes, your son mentioned the possibility of filing a lawsuit to have you declared incompetent. Again, without serious medical grounds, this is virtually impossible. But I would recommend that you undergo a full medical examination in the near future so that we have the most up-to-date documents confirming your legal capacity." "I'll make an appointment with my doctor today," I promised. "And one more thing, Mrs. Knox," Edward added. "I would advise you to contact your children, even if only in writing. Let them know that you are safe and that your departure was voluntary. This will help neutralize any attempts to use the argument of strange behavior or disappearance against you." I paused, considering his advice. On the one hand, I wanted my children to suffer a little longer from uncertainty. On the other hand, Edward was right. The longer I remained silent, the more reason they would have to claim that I was mentally unstable. "Okay," I finally agreed. "I'll write them an email, but I won't go into details or give them my new address." "That's a wise decision," Edward approved. "If you have any further questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to contact us at any time." After talking to the lawyer, I felt more confident. Legally, I was protected. The children could not claim my property or control my actions. This gave me freedom of action, which I intended to use to the fullest. The phone rang again. This time it was Lloyd. I ignored the call and put my phone on silent. It wasn't time to talk yet. Instead, I decided to write the email Edward had advised me to write. I opened my laptop, thought for a moment, and began typing. "Lloyd, Bridget, Toby. First of all, I am alive and well. I am fine, so you can stop calling hospitals and police stations. My departure was planned and voluntary. I have decided to start a new life away from Olite, and I will not be returning. I intend to sell the house in Olite, but not through Lloyd's agency. I have already contacted another realtor. As for my property in Radcliffe, yes, I do own 3 apartment buildings, and yes, I deliberately kept this from you. Given your habit of only contacting me when you need money, I think you understand why. I changed my will to disinherit you after much thought. This is not a spontaneous decision based on resentment, but the result of observing your behavior over many years. You have shown me that you do not see me as a person with my own desires and rights, but as a burden or a source of potential profit. This is not the kind of relationship I wish to reward. I will not be providing my new address. If you need to contact me about legal matters, please do so through my attorney, Edward Woods. In closing, I want to say that I do not hate you. I am simply disappointed and tired. I am 68 years old and deserve peace and respect. If you can ever treat me as an equal rather than a burden or an ATM, perhaps we can rebuild our relationship. But the decision will be mine, not yours. Elvis. I reread the letter several times, made some edits, and finally clicked send. I felt no joy or satisfaction, only a quiet sadness that my relationship with my children had reached this point. But I did not regret my decision. Sometimes you have to be tough to protect yourself. After sending the letter, I turned on the sound on my phone, preparing for a barrage of new calls, and they weren't long in coming. The first, of course, was Lloyd. I took a deep breath and answered, "Yes, Lloyd." "Mom!" He clearly didn't expect me to answer. "Where are you? What's going on? You just sent me some crazy letter." "The letter says it all, Lloyd," I replied calmly. "I have nothing to add. But this is ridiculous." His voice trembled with rage. "You can't just disappear. You have responsibilities, a family." "What responsibilities, Lloyd?" I asked. "To whom? To the children who decided to send me to a nursing home against my will? To the grandchildren I see once every 6 months at family gatherings? No, I have no obligations." "We did it for you," he almost shouted, "to keep you safe, under supervision." "No, Lloyd," my voice remained even. "You did it for yourselves, to get the money from selling the house. I heard your conversations about how you would divide the proceeds." There was silence. Then Lloyd spoke in a different tone, more threatening. "I've already consulted with a lawyer. We can file a lawsuit to have you declared incompetent. Your strange behavior, secret accounts, sudden departure, these are all signs of mental instability." "Go ahead," I replied. "My lawyer has already warned me about that possibility. I have the opinions of 3 independent doctors confirming my full legal capacity, and all the documents are in order. You'll just be wasting your time and money, Lloyd." "This isn't over, Mom," he said after a pause. "You can't just write us out of your life." "I already have," I replied and hung up. Bridget was the next to call. Her tactic was different: tears and emotional blackmail. "Mom, how could you do this to us?" she sobbed. "We were so worried. Iris is crying, asking where Grandma is." "I'm sorry I made you worry, Bridget," I replied. "But I'm an adult, and I have the right to make my own decisions." "But why didn't you trust us? Why did you hide your houses and money? We could have helped you manage your assets." I almost laughed. Help manage? More like help squander. "Bridget, let's be honest. If you knew about my financial situation, you would constantly ask me for money for your needs. Like you asked for money to pay for Iris's tuition last year, even though I know your salary allows you to cover those expenses." "That's not fair," she exclaimed. "We're family. We should help each other." "Help, yes," I agreed. "Take advantage, no." "You only saw me as a wallet or a burden, Bridget, not as a person with my own desires and plans." "So what now?" she asked after a pause. "Are you just going to cut us out of your life?" "For now, yes," I replied. "I need time and space. If you learn to respect my decisions, maybe we can rebuild our relationship. But on my terms, not yours." After talking to Bridget, I declined Toby's call. His letter was enough. I knew his sudden concern was just an attempt to get my money, and I wasn't going to encourage that game. Instead, I answered a call from Orrin, who just wanted to make sure I was settled in my new place. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "The kids must be furious." "To say the least," I said, smiling involuntarily. "Lloyd is threatening legal action. Bridget is playing the sympathy card, and Toby has suddenly become the most caring son in the world." "Predictable," Orrin chuckled. "But you're legally protected, so don't worry." "I'm not worried," I replied. For the first time in a long time, I feel truly free. After talking to Orrin, I turned off my phone. I'd had enough drama for one day. I decided I deserved a day of peace and pleasure after all that emotional turmoil. Maybe a walk around town, lunch at a cafe, a visit to the local art museum. The possibilities were endless. As I put on my coat and hat, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me looked older than her years, but there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A spark of determination, a confidence in her own abilities. I smiled at my reflection and left the apartment, ready to explore my new life, without guilt, without the burden of obligations, without manipulation. Behind me, I left my phone turned off with hundreds of missed calls, proof that I had finally made my children pay attention to me. It was just a shame that it took depriving them of their inheritance to do so. The winter in Redcliffe was surprisingly mild. Snow fell rarely, and when it didn't last long, quickly melting under the sun, which seemed to shine more often and more brightly than in Olite. Or maybe it just seemed that way to me in the light of my new free life. 4 months had passed since the day I left my farewell gift to the children. 4 months of a new life, new discoveries, and, most importantly, new rules that I set for myself. My apartment in a multifamily building on Maple Street had become a real home. I had furnished it to my taste, without compromise, without regard for anyone else's opinion. The walls of the living room were decorated with my own watercolors. I took painting lessons twice a week from a local artist and made noticeable progress. In the corner stood an antique rocking chair bought at a flea market. Next to it, a floor lamp with a fabric shade that created a cozy light for evening reading. The bookshelves were crowded not only with old favorite books, but also with new ones. I finally found time for contemporary literature, which I had only heard about before. In the bedroom, there was a wide, comfortable bed with a mountain of pillows and a handmade quilt that I had sewn myself, taking quilting lessons at a local senior center. On the bedside table was a photo of Silas and several pictures of my grandchildren. There were no photos of my children in the apartment, a deliberate decision, a symbol of my new approach to family relationships. The daily routine developed naturally, without coercion. In the morning, I would have a leisurely breakfast with coffee and fresh pastries from the bakery around the corner. Then, depending on the day of the week, painting lessons, swimming lessons, or just a walk in the city park. After lunch, I often volunteered at the local library, helping with accounting and sometimes reading to children. I devoted my evenings to my hobbies, painting, reading, knitting, or spent them in the company of new friends. To my surprise, I made many friends. My neighbors, Mrs. Chang with her love of art, Professor Forrest with his encyclopedic knowledge, the young couple Riley from the third floor, and their charming little boy. At the senior center, I met a whole group of women my age, former teachers, nurses, accountants, who, like me, were enjoying their well-deserved retirement and new opportunities. And then there was Earl Hollister, a gray-haired gentleman of 72 with a strikingly straight back and clear blue eyes. A former history professor, he now led a local history club at the local school and was writing a book on the history of Radcliffe. We met in the library, where I was helping to sort through the archives, and he was looking for material for his book. We got talking, discovered we had common interests, and then somehow started seeing each other. First in cafes to discuss books, then at concerts by the local symphony orchestra, and by Christmas we were regularly having dinner together on weekends. It wasn't passionate love or even a romantic relationship in the traditional sense. Rather, it was a deep friendship between two people who understood and appreciated each other, who didn't demand the impossible, but gave each other what was necessary: attention, respect, warmth. Earl never tried to replace Silas in my heart, and I didn't try to take the place of his late wife. We were simply creating something new, something of our own, something special. The children continued to try to contact me all this time. The first month was the most intense, dozens of calls and messages every day. I rarely responded, mostly with dry emails confirming that I was fine, but giving no details about my life or whereabouts. Lloyd was the most persistent. His messages ranged from threats of legal action to attempts at reconciliation. He even hired a private investigator to find me, but Edward warned me about it, and I took the necessary precautions. I made sure my name didn't appear in any public documents except the most necessary ones, and I asked my friends to be careful on social media. Bridget called every Sunday, like clockwork. I sometimes answered, but the conversations were short and superficial. She talked about Iris, her work, the weather, as if there had never been any conflict between us. I listened politely, answered in monosyllables, and always found an excuse to end the conversation after 10 minutes. Toby, as I expected, quickly lost interest in finding his mother when he realized there was no financial gain to be had. He called rarely, mostly when he needed money, and was always refused. By the third month, the calls became less frequent. Lloyd had apparently exhausted his legal options. As Edward had warned, without serious medical grounds, it was impossible to have someone declared incompetent simply because they made financial decisions that their children didn't like. Bridget reduced her calls to once every 2 weeks. Toby almost disappeared from the radar, except for the occasional drunken phone call in the middle of the night, which I ignored. I sold the house in Olyte through a real estate agency in another city. The price turned out to be even higher than I expected. Real estate in small towns has become popular with people who are tired of big cities. I divided the money from the sale into 3 parts. I invested one part in renovating my apartment buildings, put the second part into an account for future travel, and transferred the third part to trust accounts for my grandchildren. They will have access to the money when they turn 21, regardless of how our relationship turns out. And then one day in mid-February, I received an unusual letter. Not an email, but a real paper letter, sent by post to my lawyer's address with a request to forward it to me. Neat girlish handwriting on the envelope, a stamp from Olyte. I immediately knew who it was from. Dear Grandma Elvis, I hope you are well. My name is Paige Knox. I am Lloyd and Audrey's daughter, your granddaughter. I am 14 years old. I know that you and my dad, and Aunt Bridget and Uncle Toby, are having a difficult time right now. They don't tell me the details, but I've overheard their conversations and understand that they hurt you, and that's why you left. I'm not writing on their behalf, and they don't even know about this letter. Please don't tell them. They'll be angry. I just wanted to say that I miss you. We were never particularly close. Dad rarely took us to see you, and when we did visit, the adults always talked about their own business and didn't really let us interact. But I remember you telling me stories about your childhood when I was 8 or 9, and how you taught me to bake gingerbread cookies last Christmas. Those were good times. I'm not asking you to come back or make up with Dad. I just wish I could talk to you sometimes, or even meet up if possible. Maybe I could come visit you during spring break. I can tell my parents I'm going to a friend's house for a couple of days. I have pocket money for the ticket. If you don't want to meet up, I understand. Maybe we could just write to each other. I have an email address that my parents don't check. I hope you're happy where you are now, and that you haven't stopped loving us, your grandchildren, even if you're angry with our parents. With love, your granddaughter Paige. I reread the letter several times, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. Paige, a quiet, serious girl with a book under her arm. That's how I remembered her from our rare encounters. She always seemed to me to be the most thoughtful of my grandchildren, but I never thought she was so attached to me. The thought of meeting her brought mixed feelings. On the one hand, I missed my grandchildren and didn't want them to suffer because of a conflict that wasn't their fault. On the other hand, I was afraid that Lloyd and Audra might use Paige to find out where I lived and resume their attempts to control my life. I decided to discuss it with Earl during our next meeting. We were sitting in his apartment, in a cozy living room overlooking the city park, drinking tea when I showed him Paige's letter. "What do you think about this?" I asked after he finished reading it. Earl stroked his beard thoughtfully. "The letter seems sincere," he said, "and the girl is clearly intelligent since she understands the complexity of the situation at such a young age. But what if it's Lloyd's trick?" I voiced my concerns. "What if he made her write this letter to find out where I am?" "It's possible," Earl nodded, "but you can take precautions. Meet her somewhere neutral, not here, or start by corresponding to make sure she's sincere." "I don't want her to think I don't love her," I sighed. "Grandchildren are not to blame for their parents' selfish behavior." "Then write to her," Earl suggested. "Start with emails. See how your communication develops. If you feel she is sincere, you can think about meeting." I followed his advice. That same evening, I wrote to Paige at the address indicated in the letter. I told her that I was doing well, that I was living in a new city and doing what I loved. I explained why I had left in simple terms, without making unnecessary accusations against her parents, and I made it clear that I was open to communicating with her, on my terms. Our correspondence continued for several weeks. Paige wrote about school, her friends, and the books she was reading. I told her about my art classes, volunteering at the library, and my new friends. We avoided talking about Lloyd and my other children, as if by unspoken agreement. With each letter, I became more and more convinced of Paige's sincerity. Her messages were too personal, too detailed to have been dictated by adults, and they had that youthful combination of wisdom and naivety that is difficult to fake. At the end of March, I decided to meet her, but not at my house, as Paige had requested, but in Midway, a town located roughly halfway between Radcliffe and Oleate. I booked a room in a small hotel for the weekend and sent Paige money for a ticket so she wouldn't have to spend her allowance. The meeting went even better than I had expected. Paige looked more mature during the months we hadn't seen each other. She had grown taller and become more confident. We spent 2 days walking around Midway, visiting local museums, and just talking about everything under the sun. I showed her my watercolors, and she shared her poems with me. We both avoided talking about the tension in the family, but on our last evening together, Paige brought it up. "Dad was very angry after you left," she said, staring into her cup of cocoa. "He talked about courts and lawyers all the time, and then he just gave up. Now he rarely mentions you, and if anyone asks, he says you decided to start a new life in another city." "What does your mom say?" I asked cautiously. "Mom?" Paige shrugged. "She never really talked about you. I think she's glad it turned out this way. She always thought Dad spent too much time on family obligations." I nodded. Audra always seemed like a cold and calculating woman to me. "What about you?" I asked. "Aren't you angry with me for leaving?" Paige thought for a moment. "At first I was upset," she admitted. "But then, when I overheard my parents talking about money and inheritance, I understood why you might have been hurt. They talked about you as if you were, well, a thing, not a person." "That's exactly how I felt," I said quietly. "Like an object that was in their way." "I'm sorry they did that," Paige said, covering my hand with hers. "I would never do that." "I know, dear," I smiled. "That's why we're here together now." Before we parted, I gave Paige a small gift, a watercolor painting of Midway Park that I had painted especially for her, and a promise that we would continue to communicate and meet, not necessarily in secret, but on our own terms, without her parents' interference. After that meeting, I received 2 more letters, one from Iris, Bridget's daughter, and one from Ned, Paige's older brother. Both expressed a desire to maintain a relationship with me, regardless of the conflict with their parents. I replied to both, suggesting the same model as with Paige: correspondence, and then, possibly, meetings on neutral territory. These were my new rules for family relationships. I communicated with those who truly valued me as a person, not as a source of profit or a burden. And, to my surprise, those people turned out to be my grandchildren, not my children. Sitting on the balcony of my apartment on a warm spring evening, I reflected on the vicissitudes of family ties. We are accustomed to thinking that blood relations automatically mean love and support, but the reality is more complicated. A real family is defined not by genes, but by actions, respect, and reciprocity. And sometimes the closest bonds are formed where we least expect them. My new life was built on my own rules. I decided who to associate with and on what terms. I chose how to spend my days and what to spend my money on. I determined who was in my circle of close friends, and they were not necessarily the people society considered my family. Earl, sitting next to me with a book in his hands, was now closer to me than my own children. Mrs. Chang with her passion for art, Professor Forrest with his stories about faraway countries, the volunteers from the library. They all became my new family, chosen by me, not given to me by fate, and it was wonderful. At 69, I finally learned to live for myself, by my own rules. It's just a pity that it took such a painful break with the past to achieve this. But as they say, better late than never. Perhaps someday my children will understand that I did it not out of revenge, but out of self-preservation, that I had a right to respect, to my own decisions, to my own life. And if they don't understand, well, that's their choice. I will continue to live by my own rules, enjoy every day, and build relationships with those who truly appreciate me for who I am.